Hello everyone, this is Javier Correa, the Tax Terminator, and today I want to talk to you about Southeast Asia and Latin America. These are two fantastic regions, two tax-friendly regions that our clients often talk about. I'm going to tell you why I ultimately chose to remain in Latin America, what I think the strong points are in Southeast Asia and LATAM, what I think the weak points are in Southeast Asia and in LATAM, to help guide you so that you can make your very own decision. Which one is better for you? You'll see. Stay tuned. Hello everyone, this is Javier Correa, the Tax Terminator, and so today the big topic is comparing Southeast Asia and Latin America. I think these two regions are the ones that come up the most often when I'm talking to clients who are young, entrepreneurial, who are looking to make big bucks, who are looking to really create their wealth, people who don't have generational wealth, who are not looking for a safe place to park it. I've seen most of our older clients go for the safer bet, which is mostly Europe, which is wonderful from a cultural perspective, but less dynamic from an economic perspective. And I've seen most of our younger clients go for more up-and-coming markets that are highly concentrated in Southeast Asia or Latin America. So I want to share with you exactly why I chose to remain in Latin America as opposed to branch out to Southeast Asia to a large extent. I want to share with you the different elements I took under consideration, and I want to help you decide whether Southeast Asia or Latin America might be the right choice for you. So the first thing I want to talk about is taxes. So obviously, being the tax terminator, one of the main points that I considered when making my decision was which region is more tax friendly. And ultimately, I do think that Latin America offers more tax flexibility. If you look at the regions and the jurisdictions that are tax friendly in Southeast Asia, you're going to find Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore. You can obviously massively reduce your taxes in any of these regions, but I do find that there is one specific element that really makes it a bit more difficult and a bit less flexible in Southeast Asia, which is that in most cases, you have systems where there is some element of remittance. So that is the case for Malaysia and Thailand. So yes, you can defer taxes if you have a lot of foreign source income, but ultimately when you bring the money in, you will be subject to tax. So yes, is it possible to make $10 million a year and maybe live on $1 million and therefore your effective tax rate is really low? Of course it's possible, and we've helped many clients relocate to Southeast Asia using this strategy, and it works. But I wanted the freedom to not have to worry about necessarily remittance. So that meant that Thailand was essentially off my radar for tax residence purposes, and also that Malaysia was largely off my radar as well. So Malaysia is a bit more flexible than Thailand when it comes to what income is taxed upon remittance, but that flexibility is essentially coming to an end. When you look at Hong Kong or Singapore, there are semi-territorial systems, especially in the case of Singapore. And so if I wanted to actually run an active business, as of now, I'm more of a one-man show kind of guy. So I really need for the area where I'm living in, the area of my tax residence, to be also friendly from a business perspective. And when it comes to Singapore and Hong Kong, honestly, yes, you can save on tax, but that is provided that you have a lot of income that is truly sourced abroad. If you have a business and you're running it directly from Singapore or Hong Kong, there are some tax strategies that you can put in place, and the tax rates are low, and I don't want to discredit those jurisdictions by any means, but I think those work better for people who have larger businesses that really have international teams already in place, and where you're receiving some foreign source dividends or things of that nature, but where you are not actively performing the work. So this in contrast with Latin America, where in Panama, Costa Rica, the DR, or Uruguay, for example, it is completely possible to run your business from those countries and still have them operate fully tax-free. So if you go to a Uruguay free zone, if you are in Panama and you use the territorial tax rules to your advantage, there are different ways in which you can set up your business. And if you are doing it properly, you can be a tax resident of that country, have your offices in those jurisdictions, and also enjoy tax neutrality from a business perspective and very optimized taxation situation from the personal perspective. So ultimately, I do think Latin America offers greater flexibility for those that are just starting out. The second element that I took into consideration is a element that I like to call assimilation. So Latin America is a region of immigrants, right? Even my native homeland, Venezuela, my grandmother's generation was largely made up of European immigrants that crossed the Atlantic after the Spanish Civil War, then World War II, and ultimately found their way to places like Venezuela, Argentina, Uruguay. And what I love about Latin America is that we don't care where you come from. As long as you integrate into our communities, you become one of us. And so that's something I find beautiful, and that's something you don't really find in Southeast Asia. In Southeast Asia, I think the locals are extremely welcoming. They're some of the kindest people you'll ever meet. But as a Westerner, I always felt like the foreigner in Asia, right? So in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Hong Kong, you're always seen as, oh, the foreigner who lives here, we treat you nice, we give you tax incentives, you're always welcome to be here. But for example, obtaining a passport in many cases in Asia is very difficult. It's not something you're going to do easily. Whereas in Latin America, if you meet the requirements, everyone, any country would be more than happy to naturalize you. And also there's a cultural element, right? Even if you love Asian culture, I think that the East is different from the West in so many profound ways that you can admire Eastern culture, you can respect Eastern culture as I do. I have a profound respect for the religions of the East, for their customs, but ultimately they will never be mine. I will never fully integrate into that culture. And that's why I also believe Latin America is to that extent more welcoming for those who are not just transitioning through, but who actually want to settle down and basically have roots in a specific place. The third element I would consider, and this is something deeply personal, is that I like being in places that are strongly influenced by American and European culture. So this is something that not everybody shares, and that's completely fine. Like there are certain people who want to get away from the West as much as possible, who want a complete change, and that's completely okay, but that just wasn't me. And so what I like about Latin America is that Latin America is like a balanced approach where you have the core values that you would find in a place like Europe or the US, but at the same time, the level of soft freedom is very high. So you may not have freedoms written down in a constitution like you would in a place like the US or maybe some European country, but you do have an overall sense of, an easygoing culture where problems can be resolved by talking to someone, where maybe if the neighbor plays music a bit too loud, listen, you knock on the door, you have a drink with him and you solve the problem. You don't have to go and do a full-scale lawsuit, but the general, let's say, functioning of society is very similar to what you would find in North America or Western Europe. Ultimately, Latin America is a sort of an extension of Western civilization in many ways, Judeo-Christian values, etc. Whereas in the East, you really find an alternative way of life, an alternative way of viewing life that is different. You are further away from the sphere of influence of a place like the United States or like Western Europe. And I think that it is, again, better for people who just want something completely different. People who maybe have given up on the West, and again, that's completely fine. People who just want to start over and who want this, like different perspective of the world order. People who, for example, may believe that China is going to be the new world power. I think that for people who are in that type of world vision, then Southeast Asia is definitely a better choice. The fourth element I took into consideration was time zones. So I have a lot of business and personal links to the United States. And so for me, staying within a time zone that aligned well with, for example, Miami, Florida, New York City, Houston, Texas, that was very important for me from a business perspective. And Southeast Asia obviously does not align well. You're talking about 10, 12, 13-hour differences, and that ultimately just didn't play well for me. Again, somebody whose business interests are more aligned with Asia and the Asia-Pacific region and ASEAN, you're going to find that Southeast Asia is a wonderful choice for you to lay down your roots and to relocate. The fifth element that I would also take into consideration is language. So I'm a big fan of languages, and I love learning new languages, but ultimately I do feel comfortable being in a place where I can express myself very easily. So I speak a variety of Western languages. I speak English, I think, relatively well, and I can basically speak French also quite well. Spanish is my native language. I get by in German and Italian, but if you put me in a setting where I have to speak Chinese or Thai or Filipino or whatever the Asian language will be, I'll doubtless I'll learn, but those languages are very different from everything I know. And so I can be there for a while, but ultimately I do like the comfort of being in a place where I can express myself in a language that I fully dominate. And again, this is something very personal. Maybe, again, if you have the opportunity to grow up with Asian languages, or you have some Asian influence in your family, or maybe you're just very, gifted in terms of language learning and you are able to learn Asian languages very quickly, maybe that's not an issue for you. And in that case, that's great. You can go to Southeast Asia, and that's fantastic. I would say, an element where Southeast Asia and Latin America were mostly equal in terms of my analysis was weather. In general, you can find very nice weather in both areas, especially if you're like me and you like the warmer climate, you're a very beach-oriented person, then definitely places like Malaysia, places like the Philippines are wonderful in Southeast Asia. And you can also find great places in the Caribbean, like the Dominican Republic. You've got Panama that has a very Caribbean culture, even though they're part of the Central American continent. And so ultimately, I think that in terms of weather, you do find very nice alternatives in both places. In terms of cost of living, I think that in general, cost of living in Latin America is slightly lower. I do think in Southeast Asia, it really depends on where you're going. So Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, those are more affordable. However, if you want to go to a Singapore or a Hong Kong, which in many cases are the most tax advantageous, then those are pretty expensive. Whereas in Latin America, I have found, very decent options for housing and health insurance and such in areas like, Panama, Costa Rica, the DR, Uruguay, tax-friendly but more expensive. So overall, I do think Latin America has a lower cost of living, and that also is a point in favor of Latin America. Lastly, I would also say that if you are of the belief that the world economic order is shifting towards the east and you want to have one foot in the east, one foot in the west, which is something that many of our clients tell us that they want to do, then I do think you should consider Southeast Asia, because Latin America is more Western centric, it is more redundant. And so in my personal situation as an international tax attorney, I have focused my career more on the West, and I feel comfortable with that. And I don't mind mainly working with the US, Canada, Europe, and that's why Latin America doesn't really affect me in that regard. But I will say that if you believe that Asia is the future, if you believe that the wealth of the world is moving from the west to the east, then definitely consider establishing some kind of base in Southeast Asia, because that is a wealth hub that, is completely different, and you won't be exposed to it really as much if you remain in Latin America. I think that is something that is very important to consider. And that's it. I think those are pretty much the major points that I took into consideration when I made my choice. I hope that these points can be some kind of starting off guide or a kind of starter pack for any of you that are maybe debating between going to Southeast Asia or Latin America. Please let me know in the comments if you would prefer one or the other. And if you want more information about Southeast Asia, Latin America, Europe, Africa, or any part of the world that might interest you, then definitely drop a comment down below, subscribe to this YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram, and remember, this is the Tax Terminator. In the next video, I'll be back.